your first book, you looked like a genius because you wrote about the corruption, how this whole thing is going to crumble right before 2008.
Yeah.
And you pretty much talked about the hypocrisy, big picture wise, like what Wall Street's telling you what to do, they're doing the complete opposite. And so that's probably what got you started in this. Like what the banks are telling you to do, they're telling you to do one thing, but yet their tier one assets, which I hope you'll delve into,
Yeah.
they're putting all their safest assets into life insurance.
Yeah. Yeah, and gold and things like that. So it's do as I say, not as I do. And as Thomas Jefferson said, banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. And Henry Ford said, if people really understood the banking system and the Federal Reserve, I have no doubt there'll be revolution by tomorrow morning.
This is BetterWealth with Caleb Williams. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I don't even know how to open this thing up. I think of like Joe Rogan. A lot of my shows go like 35, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And I have totally taken time limits off. We will go until you tell me to stop.
Okay.
But you, my friend, are incredible. So thank you for making it here. And I don't even know where to begin. I don't, maybe you want to like give a little bit of context on who you are. I just want to tee you up in this. When I left the bank and in the process of seeking truth, I don't know if you know this, but I have a hard time reading, and your books almost put me to the grave.
I don't mean to do that.
If you would have seen this first book of yours, I have highlights. I had to reread chapters, and to be totally frank, I'm not sure I comprehended everything.
Sure.
But I'm telling you, I opened up this conversation with you before we started recording saying, are you afraid that people are going to come after you? And we've seen some crazy cases of people committing suicide. And you have some pretty insane things that you've done research on. And I'm telling you, out of all the people that I've interviewed, you are the most researched. And so I just want to tee you up with that, man. I'm grateful that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So before we jump into what you write about, can you give a little bit of context on your backstory? And I've heard some of your other interviews, and you start right like out of college. I'm actually curious, how did you grow up? How did you what was your parents? What did they do? And why did you get into the financial service business to begin with?
I never thought I would get into it, to be honest with you, Caleb. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Massachusetts, and I had great parents, really wonderful, hardworking parents. My father was Marine during World War II, and he went through Guadalcanal. Tough guy, very, very disciplined. Thank you, God, for his power of example. And he ended up being executive, believe it or not, for John Hancock in pensions and so forth. Had no idea what I would get into this business. Unfortunately, he died when I was young of cancer. He was never a very strong guy, extremely strong. Had a heart of a gold. There wasn't really a churchgoer, Caleb, but he was a Christian you're ever going to meet. And then I had a mother. She was who was wonderful. She was an automotive accountant and great work ethic. Grew up in a great town. Had a brother. I had a great. I was a hockey player. I was one of those kids who used to take apart things and figure out how things worked. And I think that's kind of foreshadows my research today, because I want to see how things really work. And so I had a great town, and I could never figure out how people like in the front church pews got to where they were. But a lot of it had to deal with money, and I just really didn't know the mysteries of this stuff. And it was a wonderful place to grow up. I had great family, but I lost my father at a young age, right when I got out of college, and my mother got a stroke. So in my right around your age, Caleb, I essentially had lost my father, and I had to take care of my mom. And then, so I had a really great childhood, but then my kind of things in my 20s, my life kind of exploded with a lot of responsibilities and so forth. So, but I get into technology first of all, and I actually was in I sold communication systems, and I was good at sales, and I was like one of the top reps in the country when I was 25, 26 years of age, like your age. And but I moved on. I got involved in a high-tech startup, sold missile parts I traveled around the country selling missile parts and I spent a lot of time in Southern California, and primarily because that was the big where the aerospace industry was, and in Chicago and Texas somewhat. But that, I went through some, I got kicked out of that company, went through another company, and I really got my hat handed to me. And I always wanted to be self-employed, and I got into this business, the life insurance business, at a very, very tough time. But but I was determined to succeed, and I worked my ass off to be successful. And like in 1982 or thereabouts, 83, I was Rookie of the Year for Prudential, and then I left them and joined New England Life and started a pension business and sold that back to New England Life in 89. And then I lost my brother, who I was very, very close to, in 89, and I had actually life insurance in his life, and actually I used that life insurance proceeds to set up a third-party administration firm, which became successful. And in the meantime, I got married, had 3 kids, and the whole thing. And but I was working all the time. And in 19, and then launched a third-party administrator. Became really very successful. My accountant wanted to put on the Inc. 500, but I had a partner, and and we eventually broke up. That was very difficult, and the lawyers always win. And then I had 3 wonderful kids, and I went through some traumatic times, and reinvented myself because I had a big benefits business. I was actually doing benefits for publicly traded companies and a lot of venture capital startups. I was actually made a lot of money in that business. That whole changed, and set up a registered investment advisor in 2001, which I still have today, to do financial planning. But then I went through a divorce, and my life was a book of Job. Yeah. I lost everything. Okay. So I had but I was introduced to a lot of good people at the time by Robert Castellone. I was an elite guy, and because I was in the pension business, I understood numbers. And as a matter of fact, just before our call, I was doing some numbers for pension plans for some doctors in the South. But and I still do some of that today. But I intuitively knew a lot of the stuff which was sold by Wall Street, the mutual funds, the 401ks, all this stuff. It didn't work. Intuitively, I knew they didn't work. And at the time, Caleb, this is back years ago, 25 years ago, if you had a retirement plan, you had a lot of money. It was the worst place in the world you could have it from positioning from estate taxes. But this is so. And I owned the pension business, and I said, well, gee whiz, and I grew the thing, and I got rid of it essentially because there was so much red tape, and I figured I wasn't really making any money on this. If the owner had the lot of money in the plan, it was really the highest place to be taxed. So who's making all the money? So through my introduction to Leap, and then my introduction to Nelson Nash, I was very blessed, and I realized when Bob Castellone taught me from the movement of money that a lot of this stuff is a bunch of crap, and it is. And then I learned really from an economic point of view that life insurance was really the only things that worked. And then I had really good mentors, Nelson Nash. We became good friends. It was a blessing in my life. I was going through a very, very difficult time. So I wrote so I started researching this. So at the time I was separated, I went through a horrible divorce, and I have 3 beautiful children out of that, and an ex-wife, and I wish her the best. I had to reinvent myself. Yeah. So I had this big income, and I lost everything. And I had to reinvent myself. And I said, well, what does work? I said, well, annuities insurance worked. And then I started I was at a conference out of the Coronado Del Mar, which in San Diego. You ever been out there, Caleb?
Yep.
I was at, that beautiful there's a beautiful dining room, whatever. It was. I guess the first place where Thomas Edison actually put light bulbs in, believe it or not, in a hotel. But I was at a breakfast meeting one day and a late meeting, and someone said about the Federal Reserve and how it wasn't federal and there were no reserves. I said, "What are you guys talking about?"
So what year was this when you got like?
I would say, well, actually, this was probably around. Oh, gee whiz. This is probably like in the early '90s or so.
Okay. So you start getting introduced to. So this is before you start your registered investment firm.
Yeah, this is before I started. Right around, because I had a successful group practice. Okay, so I was just getting to lead because I saw it as a way to be of more assistance to people.
And so the whole Federal Reserve started this whole rabbit hole of research.
And it's just a big freaking scam, And so what you see, what's happening today is just they've crossed the Rubicon, Caleb, and now they're buying bonds today. This week, buying corporate bonds and they're buying ETFs and the whole thing, and they're bailing out their buddies in Wall Street once again. So I understood this stuff, but I figured if I didn't speak up about it, it'd be a sin.
Yeah.
So don't ask me to change the oil in my car, but I can tell how the banking system works, or mutual fund company works, or insurance company works. I just don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I want to just point something out. If you think you're smart, or if you think you know a lot about money, be humbled, buy Barry's books, and tap out. And by the way, that's why there's no time limits on this thing, because
sure.
My goodness, man, like you go in so in depth. So when did you start researching? Did you when you heard about the Federal Reserve, there being no reserve, it kind of being a scam? Did that start research? How do you research, number one? Do you have bias when you go into it, or how do you come up with these massive books going into things that are? I mean, yeah, you can find it on Google, but you must have done some deep research going in back doors, because some of the stuff that you write about, I try to Google. It's nowhere.
They've taken it down. Some of the stuff, they've taken it down already.
Yeah.
Caleb, which is kind of frightening, which they have. So it actually gets back to my father. Love of my father. Because when I was taking care of him when he was dying of cancer, we used to talk. We have long talks. We watched Sunday Night Football together and stuff. He was very loving. I had a great father. And, I was taking care of him when he was dying of cancer. He said, all the world's problems get back to economic ones. And this is why we went to war, in the World War II and the whole thing. And so it really made, and I agreed with them. And so it was really a passion that was given to me by my father. And then I said, well, heck, I was in a crazy time in my life. I said, what else am I going to do? So I said, I might as well start researching everything. So I had a hunch, and I heard something about banks owning life insurance and things like that. And I had nothing to go on, Caleb, okay, at the time. So having a benefits company, you had to be bold, and I've gotten a lot of clients that have been bold over the years. So I started researching it on the internet. Thank you, God, for the internet. Thank you, God. And and this is the time you had to pay $5 for a Wall Street Journal article. You couldn't get it online. So I kept it, and I had no money at the time. So I'm actually getting 4 or 5 articles and paying $25 for an article on the time for the Wall Street Journal. And I said, holy moly, look at all these banks are buying life insurance, and no one's talking about it. So then I started coming up, the life brokers I knew were involved in the space. They wouldn't talk to me. And then I knew some of these big brokers, they wouldn't talk to me. So I called New York Life, who was big in the space, Mass Mutual, and Northwestern, and all these other companies, and no one would talk to me. So make a long story short, so I found out that some of the bank balance sheets had to be disclosed on, someone gave me it to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And no one really talked to me. They're kind of geeks. But there was this woman down there. She was this, I forget what her name is, God bless her in heaven. So I needed help, and I wasn't really good on computers and stuff. But so I sent her flowers and candy and stuff like that. And so how do I download this stuff? And so I was able to download all this stuff. I said, oh my God, what have I found? And so I found all these banks, and were buying these monstrous amounts of life insurance. But conversely, this is around 2003 or 4, Caleb. Okay, so I started researching this, and on research, and this is just right after the dot-com meltdown. I mean,
Yep.
85 cents every.
Your first book, you looked like a genius because you wrote about the corruption, how this whole thing is going to crumble right before 2008.
Yeah.
And you pretty much talked about the hypocrisy, big picture wise, like what Wall Street's telling you what to do, they're doing the complete opposite. And so that's probably what got you started in this. Like what the banks are telling you to do, they're telling you to do one thing, but yet they're tier one assets, which I hope you'll delve into.
Yeah.
They're putting all their safest assets into life insurance.
Yeah. Yeah, and gold and things like that. So it's do as I say, not as I do. And to me, these guys they're just bullies. And the whole thing is, I wish, hopefully through your work, whatever, we can wake people up. As Thomas Jefferson said, banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. And Henry Ford said, if people really understood the banking system and the Federal Reserve, I have no doubt there'll be revolution by tomorrow morning. Yeah. So anyway, so I had to research this stuff, and if you study history, banking has been a problem throughout history, but this so I started reading The Creature from Jekyll Island and The Case Against the Fed by one of Ed Griffith's. So I started reading it from multiple sources. So I said, "Oh, what's going on here?" No one really understood this stuff. And so I said, well, geez, I'll just plow in. And so at the time, it was a difficult time in my life. So I just researched and read everything I could get my hands on. And that's how the seeds of the first book came out. But then with Nelson Nash, when I dug up all the bank-owned life insurance, he says, he was a good Christian man. He said, Barry, you got to continue this. And so I did. And so I self-published the book and I did introduction May of 2007 in Birmingham, Alabama, is when I released the book, and it took off, and since then I think I've sold 33,000 copies in 23 countries, something like that, Caleb, whatever. This self-publishing, so there is very powerful in the net. So what you realize is that, but what has happened, Caleb. Now, what did your dad do? Your dad was a PhD. Was he he's an academic or?
Yeah, researching biology and works with vitamin companies.
Okay, so I don't know if he has like a defined benefit pension plan or anything like that. If he does, whatever. But what I discovered, Caleb, which has been essentially since really 1980s or whatever. And by the way, for you're listening out there, I'm a political atheist. Okay, and they're all, so I'm not going there. Okay, but so what happened is but what I discovered, Caleb, all the stuff which I learned when I first got into the financial planning business and insurance business and all that stuff, is that the primary concerns when I first started were protection. And really taking care of people's life insurance needs and the disability income, and setting up retirement plans, make sure savings, and all that stuff, Caleb, since it has all been abandoned. And the only way people are supposed to save today is in the market. Well, good luck. It's just you're stepping into a cesspool, but that cesspool has been supported by the Fed. So. It's I'm not against the market. I like my iPhone. I like my Google. I like my technology. But there's no difference between savings and investing anymore as far as Wall Street is concerned. They want everyone to put their money in the market. And have you seen the silliness of where they put like $1 billion into Robinhood into Hertz stock?
It's nuts what's going on.
It's stupid.
So I'm going to read what you wrote in your second book to tee us up, but then I want to go, I went through both of your books, and I want to tee up some controversial things that you've talked about, but then really go through them in depth. Like I said, this is not going to be like, the people that listen to this, it's going to be like a masterclass, and which I'm excited about. But this is what I probably should have opened up the podcast with. In your second book, you write about, in the overview, you say, in short, 401k retirement plans funded with mutual funds has become a highway of serfdom. Now, I had to research what serfdom meant. It's another word for slavery. Not much different from when the Egyptian pharaohs had people sacrifice their lives to build their pyramids. And Barry, the reason why I highlighted that is I could summarize both your books with that quote that you wrote.
Thank you. Yeah. And this is, the retail investor, the people who really know what's going on. I would stick to that. And it's probably true, unfortunately. And I think I emailed you the past weekend that they're now stuffing, and they're getting the doors been open to stuff private equity into target date funds. I mean, this is insane. Believe me, I'm no saint, but this is, these guys being bullies, and putting private equity into a target date fund is like giving a 6-year-old a circular saw. And you can quote me on that one. And so these things are very dangerous. And people say, what's so bad about private equity? We ever heard of a company called Hertz? You ever heard of J. Crew? You ever heard of Neiman Marcus? All these they're all collapsed into private equity. So they've already kind of, essentially they dominate the state pension fund, which is the ultimate dumb money. So now they're going after the retail investor. And people need to have savings and so forth. But this is not taught.
And to be honest, when you talk to the average person, and I'm going to put myself in that category too, which I probably know a whole lot more about money than the average person, this stuff is really complicated. And even when you talk and when you read, I mean, out of the thousands of people that got your book, how many do you think actually comprehend what you were saying? So one of my hopes in this interview is to break this down where the listener can say, okay, Barry, you're on a whole different level here as it relates to research, but I also want people to walk away with ammunition, knowing like this is why these things don't work. So your first book, you open up with most financial products don't work for the long haul. If you were to take a step back and like share with you myself and my audience what you meant by that, can you explain that?
Well, luckily, because I've been in the business over 35 years too, I've seen these things come and go.
Yeah.
Limited partnerships in the 80s where I sold those, and those, they're horrible. And essentially they would tie up people's money for decades, and that's a lot of the fancy esoteric stuff. Well, I'll give you a great example. Prior to the dot-com meltdown, 85 cents in every dollar was going into high-tech mutual funds. 85 cents. Okay, and they all crashed. Now, why do I say that? Caleb, you know how many companies which were on the NASDAQ in 1999 and 2000 are still, how many closed their doors since that time?
I have no clue.
75% closed their doors.
So you're saying out of the 100 companies, we'll just say there's a whole lot more, but out of the 100 companies that were around in 1999, are 75 of those are no longer
gone. They've been merged or they've gone out of business.
Huh.
And I got this data from The Economist. I'm not making this up. I wouldn't say this if I didn't know it to be true. So the whole thing is that it's always about using other people's money. And the whole thing during the dot-com meltdown, all these companies, this is where so what has evolved, Caleb, is that all the money has been controlled from essentially the asset managers. I call it the asset management industrial complex, in which, you have the giants like BlackRock and Fidelity or Infidelity or Vanguard. And Vanguard, believe me, they're State Street, Invesco, all these giant companies. This is all public record. They've essentially become the stewards of other people's money. And the thing is that when you understand the structure of a mutual fund or even a passive index fund, which everyone loves their index or their ETF, when you understand it, when you read a prospectus or you read the arbitration agreement, you realize that they actually have absolutely no responsibility.
Yeah.
So as a steward, I'm a Christian, whatever. So I remember if I give my money to you, or you give me, you would expect me to take due care and custody and protect it as if it was my own. It makes making sense. But what I'm saying, when it comes to mutual funds, it's like throw it into this casino, and if I make money, great.
Well, yeah, you even have a chapter where say "Welcome to the casino age," and that's what you mean. It's just like there's no due diligence. You're just putting money, and they're packaging it up. And like, are you seeing this problem continue? Is that what you meant when you talk about like the casino age? Is like you're saving / investing for a someday future. You're giving up total control, which is my biggest problem with the whole system. You're transferring control to other people, and essentially it's getting squandered.
Yeah. And that's, and people, it's kind of like the story is as old as man. I mean, it's always about gambling with other people's money.
Yeah.
And when you understand the system, when I do, it's always about gambling with other people's money, over leverage, and a lot of smoke and mirrors. And to me, it's just, and it's not just the U.S., it's in Canada. Like I was talking yesterday with a guy who was executive for wholesale for a major firm. Same thing in Canada, same thing in Belgium, France, UK. The British are even worse than us. So it's not. So what you saw is the collapse of the traditional pension for people like your folks or whatever, and it's been replaced by these very, very complicated mutual funds, which no one can understand. And but now through lobbying and corporatocracy, if you will, all these savings have been taken over by Wall Street and their asset managers.
Yeah, it's there's definitely, you could go down the rabbit hole on that one subject. You do talk about you've never met a man. You actually have a chapter in your first book said never met a man who made his millions off of mutual funds. And it just goes back to like, if you actually look over a long period of time, and in full disclosure, I've not been in this industry for as long as dude, you've been alive longer than, or you've been in this industry longer than I've been alive. Okay.
That is true. That is correct.
What you're saying is in the mutual fund industry, or just across the board, people are not actually making a ton of money. The people that have a lot of money in mutual funds have made their money somewhere else and just put that. Is that did I?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes when you have, you have to put the money in. I'm not against mutual funds, or whatever. And I was a big believer in modern portfolio theory, which is the efficient frontier and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But what I understood it's a rentier system, essentially going back to this led up to the French Revolution, where essentially they're collecting rents off other people's money without any responsibility or accountability, if you will.
Yeah. And
so this morphed into all facets of not just the fund business, but also to pensions and so forth. And I think it's really important that that people should be some accountability. And this is why I started to embrace insurance products, because I realized the contractual guarantees, and it says we promise to pay. And none of these fund companies say promise to pay anything.
So I want to talk about John Bogle.
Jack. Okay.
and so he founded Vanguard. All right.
That's correct.
And like he's actually endorsed you, but I know in your research, let's unpack this whole index fund conversation, because what people in the financial independence movement will say is, they'll say mutual funds are bad, high fees, put all your money in the S&P Vanguard 500. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, Jack Bogle, that's a blessing writing in the book. So I actually found his address one time, and I shot him an email. He said, "Yeah, I'd be interested in reading about your stuff." And so I sent him my books, and he actually read them all. Oh. And he thought it was great because I talk about the Wall Street corruption, the whole thing. And but I'm also killed. No one does anything for nothing, So in other words, someone has to get paid somewhere. And so one of the things, and he essentially, I don't know if he invented the index fund, but essentially the great marketeer behind it. And it's a mutual company. And I like mutual companies from a intellectual and really ownership perspective, instead of, so I like the concept of Vanguard on paper. When you start to understand the indexing is essentially the index funds have turned into communist funds, that there's no accountability. So I give a great example of General Electric, and I think maybe this is a great example. Let's say Vanguard is, for a number of years, has been the largest shareholder of General Electric. I think it's last time I looked, about 14% of the shares, but it may be lower, maybe 7-8%, but it's still a large shareholder. And the thing is that GE has gone from which is once the largest industrial company in the world, has gone from a $600 billion market capitalization in 2000, when it was the largest industrial company in the world, to, I don't know, but we can look at my phone today, probably 50, 60 billion rather. So it's lost 85% of its value. Are you with me? Because of what have you. Now, during this last time between when Jeffrey ML, I call him Two Jets Jeffrey ML, who used to fly around GE with 2 planes, he was given, and now GE is losing all this money. He blew $24 billion on stock buybacks in 2016 and 2017. Corporate cash, he spent it on buybacks at $30 a share and like $21 a share, but the vast majority, around $30 a share. He spent $24 billion of GE's valuable cash on buybacks, and the stock is, what is it? Let's just verify. I'm always one to verify. So the stock today is probably, let's say, because we got to tell the truth. But the stock is maybe like, say, $7, whatever it is. It's been as low as 5 recently. So the whole thing is this, so the stock has lost all its value. Jeffrey ML blew $24 billion on stock buybacks. He walks out the door in 2017 with a $130 million package, by the way, which included $84 million guaranteed annuity, by the way, for your listeners. Okay. Has to be disclosed. And on top of the hundreds of millions he's already met. He already made a GE. Now, why do I bring this up? Who was the head of the compensation committee when this all happened? Because the head of the compensation committee is the most important person on a publicly traded company, because he's the guy who say yay or nay on the pay. It was John Brennan, who was the former CEO of Vanguard. All you Google it, okay? Don't take my, So my point is, so you had the former CEO of Vanguard, who's the head of the compensation committee for GE, and he says nothing, and now walks out the door with $130 million. And then Flannery, his successor, was only around like 14 months. He walked out the door with another $24 million. And then they had to go and borrow, I think, $6 billion to fund their pension deficit. So my point is that Vanguard's the largest shareholder. It could be State Street, it could be BlackRock. It doesn't really matter. But I'm saying they're not saying anything about this.
So you're saying that if you're going to invest in the market, you have no problem with Vanguard because of their fee structure, but the market itself is just not a great long-term vehicle for the long haul.
Well, yeah, I'm not against it. It's just the little piece, but there's no accountability.
Okay. Yep. And we see that across the board. There's a lack of accountability across the board.
And so, so it now also too is and Jack Bogle. So this is how it's a long story, but he prior to being CEO of Vanguard, he was the CEO of Wellington Management, which I really didn't even know, which is my own backyard. You're in Denver. I'm north of Boston, but Wellington is one of the largest blue blood Yankee managers in the world. And he was running, Wellington was a public company. They kind of threw him out. They went to a private partnership, but it came out, it's a goofy thing. And this is because I had a contact in the press, but the Jack Bogle was not cheap on himself. He was making $6, $7, $8, $9 million a year 20 years ago. That's big money today. And it's huge money back then, running Vanguard. So he's saying, oh, I'm Mr. Low Cost. I'm Mr. Low Cost, when he's getting big money himself. And then when he died, he died of poor man, like it was 80, 90 million. I don't know. But that's, so.
I wonder where he put his money. Do you know where all of his money was stored?
Well, the funny thing is that his son actually runs an actively managed mutual fund around Wellesley, Mass. And actually Wellington Management, even to this day, this is another misconception. I don't know if you knew about this, Caleb, but do you know how much Vanguard has in actively managed money right now?
I don't.
Over $1 trillion.
Wow.
So the big pass investor has actually got $1 trillion, and most of it's with a lot of it's with Wellington. So I'm not against it. They have a low fee structure, but my point is the only people who seem to make out of this are the insiders on this stuff,
Yeah, I'd be curious what your thoughts are. I have a statement that I make. I call it ROR, for return on result. And I just want people to take a step back and ask the question, what do you actually want out of life? And at the end of your second book, you talk about these 12 areas to focus on. And I love your area number 1 is invest in yourself. And what I want people to start realizing is get super clear on what's important to you, and then actually design your life. I know that's shocker, but design your life in a way where you spend your time, you use your money, you use your abilities in a way that helps you live that out. And it seems like Wall Street has hijacked that, has shared with us that this is the only way. And so you have people that really want, like, they don't really put a ton of thought into it, but they're great people. And they just do what their advisor tells them. And it's all like, there's a few people at the top with no accountability, and they're really deceiving a lot of people. That's what it seems from me reading through your books, doing research. It's like, I don't think there's people intentionally trying to go around and mislead people. I just think there's a lack of accountability and a lot of misinformation. I think if you went back to college, by the way, and went to the finance classes that I went through, you would want to puke.
So a lot of the stuff. So I realized I had this gift. So I just started. Let's figure out how does the structure really work. And so what you find is that it's this is stuff what Karl Marx talked about. And I'm not a Marxist, believe me. And that's communism is worse than capitalism. But Marx warned about the triumph of capital over labor, and this is what's happened. And so if you're something like the Federal Reserve or some of these asset managers or these banks, they create money out of thin air. So how do you beat something when you can create out of thin air? So So a lot of the things. So you just want people to be happy and to have peace of mind and stuff, and be better informed, because they're not being informed by the media at all.
Right. Let's dive into BOLI, bank-owned life insurance.
Yeah.
And for the person that knows nothing about that, can we unpack what that is, how you do your research, and what banks right now own life insurance and why they do that?
Yeah. So the most important thing is a bank. Everyone needs a bank. I need a bank. We all need banks or credit unions to work with. Okay. I'm not against banks. We all have to use them. So now, but this is crazy because this is recently so banks are required to have money in reserve, or they were required to have money in reserve. So about 3 or 4 months ago. Okay. So most people don't understand that if I put, say, $10,000 in, you're in Denver, say maybe U.S. Bank or Wells Fargo or Wells Fargo, they call it whatever, that if they put $10,000 into the bank can lend out their money a minimum 9 times, which is they're creating money out of thin air. Now, during the financial crisis, they were levering it out much higher than that, and now there's no reserve requirement at all. But any event, so any prudent man or any prudent institution, they keep money in reserve. So because hard times come, so we need to have we need to have money saved for a rainy day. So let's just think of Tier 1 capital as a rainy day buffer, if you will. So that has to be the most safest assets of any of the bank. As a matter of fact, regulators do not want banks to put stock into these funds, okay, into these reserves, okay. So the regulators. Yeah, because they're too freaking volatile. So what do? So the reserve accounts for banks are what is called Tier 1 capital. It's the most important asset in the bank, and the larger the Tier 1 capital, the more money they can lend out to the public. All right, And people can go to barrymamesdyke.com and get the book if they want to read it. So all these assets have to be very, very safe assets. So any event, so things like gold, treasury bills, high quality mortgages, and that type of thing. And then, but also, holy moly, bank-owned life insurance. So they consider life insurance as one of the almost as good as gold. Not quite as good as gold, okay? But even in these days, gold is a hard asset. Is a valuable thing to have. You're in Colorado, so a lot of people I know like precious metals out there. So my point is that so the Federal Reserve, and you get in the book. So they said, well, this is a very safe asset. So the banks started to buy it in a big way, and because of the economic benefits it has. Because first of all, the life insurance companies are better managers of money than the banks are. And if you don't believe me, just look at the dot-com meltdown of 2007, 2008, or what's happening now. There's a guaranteed rate of return within the life policy, which you don't get within on a bank. You're getting a tax deferral benefit. You're getting a very large death benefit. So when everyone's going to die, we're all going to graduate. So when people die, the money comes into the bank income tax free. The cash value within that policy within the bank can be leveraged out to the public. So if say a company like J.P. Morgan, which they do have, I think they have like $12 billion in cash surrender value in their policy. As a matter of fact, I can verify that for you. They can lever that at least minimum 9 to 10, 12 times. So if they have 10, 12 billion in cash value, they can lend out a minimum 9 times that. And so also when the cash value increases within the policy, because there's a guarantee and then there's a dividend, as you know, that actually flows through their income statement. So it's actually good for Wall Street. So when you look at it, it's like these guys get it.
Yeah.
And so what a lot of these banks also buy, they bought what is called modified endowment contracts, or MECs. Yeah. And I said, why are they doing this? Why would anyone do this? Well, dumb. It took me about 2 years to figure this out, but eventually I did, and I'll share with your audience is that if a bank owns a modified endowment and they convert it into an income stream for an executive pension, which these are used to fund, they get around the 10% excise tax. The bank gets a deduction when the pay goes out to the executive. The executive's police is punched because the thing's guaranteed, and the excess of death benefit goes to the bank. Hallelujah! They're in kind of like financial heaven. Yeah. And so this is, and so I don't know if you, but this is what essentially. So the banks are buying this in a huge way. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and all these banks. I mean, you know how much these banks have paid in conduct costs and fines, Caleb, since 2010? Guess.
I don't even want to guess. I don't have a clue.
Almost a third of $1 trillion in fines.
In just fines alone.
Fines and conduct costs.
Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, life companies, they're no saints either. But I don't know any life companies who have paid even.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, and it's interesting because when I set life insurance up for people, we don't look at it as an investment, but we very much look at it like a place to store capital. And what you're
exactly.
In your research, you're like, how many banks in the U.S. are actually doing this? Are most banks have life insurance?
Well, actually, I have the latest statistics on that. On the very large ones, about 70-80% of them. For the big ones, the smaller ones, I'd say maybe 50% overall, Caleb. But smaller community banks maybe not. So
yeah.
But the very large banks, around 70-80% of them. The big.
I know the small community bank that I worked for had bank-owned life insurance, which is just really interesting. Let's go into corporate-owned life insurance. And is it true that almost every Fortune 500 company has some sort of corporate-owned life insurance on the books?
That's a lot harder work. That's you can see my first book. This is still, but you have to go through every I actually went through every DE 14A, I forget what the name of the filing is, to actually discover it. And it's not as popular as it once was, but it's really hard to dig. So, but they still, most of the companies do offer in some shape or form, but it's very difficult to dig out now.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of shovel and spade work, and no one really wants to fund me to do that. But now, but I'll give you an example. Now, do you have Comcast out there in Colorado?
Yes. And just so you guys know, COLI is corporate owned life insurance. So just like banks take their tier one assets and put them into life insurance, and sometimes they mech those contracts. Corporations can also do a special type of life insurance that can help fund pension plans and all those other things. And instead of bank-owned life insurance, it's called corporate-owned life insurance.
COLI, it's the same church, different pew. And,
yeah.
and so.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, they use it. The banks have to disclose because it's you and I who back up the banks. Okay, the corporations again, you have to go through them one by one, and all I have to do is really disclose the compensation of the first top 5 people, Caleb. So it's but a lot of them do. But when you understand it, it's like, why wouldn't you do this? So I don't have as much focus on that because it's just a lot of work. You have to find each one. But to give you an example, Comcast, you have Comcast out in Denver?
Yep.
Well, the result of a split dollar policy, this is one of the largest life insurance policies I ever paid. Ralph Roberts, who was the founder of Comcast paid out a $486 million death benefit to the spouse. And Brian Roberts,
that's a big chunk.
And Brian Roberts is now the CEO of Comcast. You want to know why your Comcast bill is so high? Brian Roberts, who's got $223 million in force now. So why is anyone buys $100 million? It can't be that bad. I mean, so
yeah. And you're just again going back to the hypocrisy going on in your research. It's like all these companies are saying to do one thing with your money, but then you actually look at the leaders and what the banks and what the corporations are doing. They're doing the exact opposite, which is just it's interesting. I when I had the opportunity to interview Nelson Nash, and it was interesting. I had dialogue with him. I said, Nelson, we can quote unquote hate on the banks, but they are institutions that are just controlling our capital better than we are. And so it's one of these concepts of like, okay, this is what the banks are doing. Let's do that ourselves. So
that's and so that's the so the banks have a lot more economic advantages because they can lever it out and so forth. But when I discovered this, I said this is even better for the individual. But as you know, the recent statistics, it's actually dropped.
Yeah. So let's talk about the way that you end your first book. You talk about life insurance is good for the consumer, practical everyday application, and then you also touch on the pension maximization strategy. So in the research of your first book, which you use the words systematically plundering, which is another key word that's coming up a lot, not economically. What application do you want someone that's reading your book? Like, what can they take away from the research that you've done, the research that you're continuing to do? Because it's all like we can get frustrated about what's going on. And I'm a big Stephen Covey fan. And at the end of the day, we got to focus on the things that we can control. We need to, and the cool thing is you're actually being proactive in getting this stuff out. But for the everyday person or for the business owner listening to this, or someone that's really wants to get ahead financially, they are disturbed. What can they do about it? And like, what are you writing about? What was your call to action kind of at the end of the first book?
Well, as my friend Nelson Nash he passed away about a year ago, but you got to learn to succeed from the system. I mean, it's like if you're in a bad relationship, what's the first thing you do? You got to get out of it. Okay.
Right.
And I think really one of the things is really, and I have a great friend of mine, Gerald Salente. He's probably one of the top trends forecasters in the country, if not in the world. He says, think for yourself. So my point is that, yeah, you really want to kind of succeed. Don't buy into the Wall Street propaganda, and because they're going to make money. They're guaranteed their fees and their income, okay, but you're getting nothing in these funds. I mean, let's look at it. The market was down 21% the first 3 months of the year. Now it's been pushed back up, but they really need, if people want to have a peace of mind and control of what they're doing, they really need to think for themselves, but listen to people like you. It's just the because money is not bad. I guess how can I put it? It's just the love of money, and
Yeah.
I guess I don't have that.
Agreed. And the word certainty comes to my mind. It seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in when we're recording this.
Yeah.
And there is something to say about if you are going to make money, understand how to put a definition of certainty on that. And in so many cases, there's no certainty that people have, period, when it comes to their money and future retirement.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, and that's what's done. I don't know if you've read my last book. That's why I wrote the book Guaranteed Income, because as people get older, they want to have some peace of mind in retirement. And again, just like the first two books I researched, is that like holy sweet Jesus. Then again I found that all these big institutions were buying these monster annuities from life insurance companies to finance their retirement plans, and no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
No one's talking about
people
it.
like to hate on certain things, or when you read a headline that says annuities are bad, and we live in a headline reading world, which must be frustrating for you because you're actually like going deep, and someone reads a headline and then wants to send hate your way as it relates to the research that you've done, because apparently you're not well researched, because I have the ability to read headlines. And so it's crazy, man. This time is I'm young. Like, imagine what's going to be like in 40 years. Like, I guess I don't even want to think about that, to be honest.
Yeah.
So your next book, you continue the research. You talk about 401ks. It's funny. I'm going to have a t-shirt next time I see you that says 401 not okay. So I'm curious about that. And then you also highlight target date funds. And this is where you really, I mean, your subtitle to the Pirates of Manhattan 2 is the highway to serfdom, which, why did you come up with that? Why did you come up with that subtitle to begin with?
Well, I said play on Hayek, and road to serfdom. And but what I realized is that, like the talk of the Egyptians, in slavery, what I realized is that it's people's savings, which is funding the Wall Street casino, and they don't have a clue. And what happened is that, like things do happen in Washington and with the politicians. This was stuck in 2006 with the Pension Protection Act of 2006, which was actually in reality another airline bailout bill. And they wanted to have a default investment blessed by Congress, so in case people chose it and the money, the investment went south, the employer didn't want any liability, and the investment manager didn't want to have any liability. So it was actually nicknamed the Fidelity Relief Act of 2006. But I know a guy was, and so through legislative fiat, Caleb, they became essentially what's called the QDIA, the Qualified Default Investment Account, mainly because of lobbying by Wall Street, Fidelity, and the rest of the companies. And so they became essentially the chosen default investment. Now, the thing is that even though in 2008 and 2009, during the financial crisis, as you know, in my research, and I got it all from Morningside data, average target date fund lost 30%.
Yep. And for the listener, how do you describe a target date fund? Because I know you just sent me something recently on more corruption in the target date fund. But what is a target date fund for the everyday listener?
Well, it's these mutual funds. I guess maybe they're saying It's like them playing God. And, because we don't know. Okay.
I like that, actually. I like that description.
Well, they asked me as being allowed to play golf because I don't know what I'm having for dinner tonight. Never mind what's going to happen next week or 5 years from 10 years. We just don't know, Caleb. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So they come up and say, we come up with these asset mixes and these algorithms and so forth with a glide path. And we'll mix and match our funds to go on a glide path. And so when you come near retirement, the investments theoretically should be in bonds, which should be somewhat stable. Well, the whole thing is it's a chimera. It's I call it financial sorcery. They really don't know. So anyway, so they're mandated in 2006. So the mutual fund companies love it. So 3 companies now, essentially Fidelity, Vanguard, and T. Rowe Price, have about 60% of the marketplace. So all these things are going along, okay, but they get hammered. There's no guarantees, and if you lose 30% one year, you're going to need all of that the next year or so just to get break even. So if you look at the target date funds over a long period of time, they really haven't done that well. But through legislative fiat, they become. And now what I've seen working even with some public companies, some major employers. It's been really so. Some benefit administrators have actually what they've done. They've taken all the investment choices out, and they put just the target date funds, and then maybe a bond fund and something else, an international fund, and that's it. Because they don't want to have any liability. So so the investment manager is protected, the employer is protected, but the retail investor is thrown out under the bus.
Yeah. And
this is what's happening. So, but anyhow, Cerulli Associates was probably one of the best researchers in the industry today. Estimates that by 2023, Caleb, roughly 80% of all 401k deposits are going to be going to target date funds.
It's crazy.
So no one really understands this stuff. I've tried to analyze these things. The SEC is just, did some recent stuff on them, but anyway, so this is what's going on with these. But these are the core investment for people like yourself.
Yeah. When you talk about 401k, it's my understanding that many companies went from a pension fund or really a pension to a 401k plan. And then when you look at the market, is it reasonable to say that the market we saw an increase dramatically, mainly because of supply and demand, because you have all this money getting poured into the market instead of getting money funding pension plans, they're funding stock market. Is that realistic to say?
Well, it's realistic. Well, yes and no, in the sense that the reason why the market's gone up so much because of all the Federal Reserve printing of money going, since the country's gone off the gold standard in 71. So a lot of the market increase, Caleb, why it's going up just because there's been so much printing of fiat currency. So yes, and yes, but also not really, just because there's so much money and it has to have a place to go. And so what has happened, what is called disintermediation in economics, which means that when you don't have money and you can't get a return in a safe place, which is hard to do today, it's being forced into very speculative types of savings. People want to catch up. They've lost. They want to gamble on it and like going to a horse. But so this is what has happened. So it's actually people have been forced into this stuff. And as I say, now it's a lot worse because they're allowing private equity into the funds.
So I want to go now to student loans. You talk about the subprime bubble and talk about headline reader. I actually did read the article, but I saw that you look at credit cards right now, you look at auto loans, and over 9% of people were in forbearance about a month ago. Obviously, at the time of this recording, we are starting to open up our country, but there's some uncertainty. From your research, what's going to happen as it relates to there's like a retirement crisis, a savings crisis, and it's very frustrating, to be quite frank, because the debt right now, the U.S. debt has over $26 trillion
with a T.
But over 70 million of unfunded liabilities. So it's like I sort of feel like this is a ticking time bomb. And from your research and from your just wisdom, what's going to happen?
Well, as Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And was a word from George Santayana said that those who don't listen to history, are doomed to failure. So something to that effect. So, but if you study empires past, and I have, if you study the fall of the Roman Empire, Caleb, or British Empire, the Dutch Empire, or the Spanish Empire, you see that it's always involves like three or four core things: way over expansion of the military, on too many foreign lands. I think we're like in 144 countries now. You see a rise of the proletariat, or the administrative class who serves the king and the queen, whatever you want to call it. And then you have speculation replacing highly value-added goods and services instead of and then you have debasement of the currency. So we've got all four. We got too many, So and the thing is, so people don't understand, but it was the debasement of the currency which brought down the Roman Empire. It wasn't the barbarians.
Interesting.
So this is when King Dollar comes off is no longer the gold standard or whatever. This is when we're going to run into problems. So nothing we can do about it. So what we can in our work help people become more independent. Learning how to
do you see there being a major collapse because of the debt and the subprime mortgages?
Yes. When it's going to happen?
Do you think student loans are going to be, because I see this thing. By the way, man, I just came out of college a couple of years ago, and I'm seeing some of my peers don't have a clue about life, graduating college, massive debt, and just like I just don't understand. Like in my head, it's like this does not add up.
No, and this is the problem. This is why so I can understand some of the protests going on. The massive inequality. If you look at inequality from face value, it's actually worse than it was prior to 1929 in the state. And after World War II, we had some type of egalitarian. But actually, if you follow it over my lifetime since 1980 thereabouts, inequality is getting worse and worse and worse. And we can go through this. That's a whole nother show. But
yeah.
So people's real wages, and again, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm a political atheist. But if you see the destruction of the unions and how people's real wages have been hurt a great deal, people are not making money. And, median income, Caleb, in America, I think a family of four is like $59,000. I mean, I live in New Hampshire, and just north of Boston. I mean, you can't live on that around here. I mean, it's expensive.
Yeah.
So people do not have the wages, and in college inflation is out of control. So when people can't afford their bills, what do? You give them debt. So you give them credit card debt, you give them auto loan debt, you give them student loan debt, and you give them mortgage debt. All of the above are all-time highs. When Obama was president, the student loan was half a $1 trillion. Today it's like 1.6 trillion. Credit cards are all-time high. Car loans all-time high. So what has happened is that, my point is that, so do I see a correction eventually? Yeah, because I don't know. It's like an ongoing frat party, Caleb. And this has been going on for a long time, and it was never corrected after last. And eventually there will be some major contraction.
So, and there's a ton that we could go into. I want to move on to you actually mentioned Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman and talk about the advice that they give. Essentially, yeah. Dave Ramsey's advice, I'm summarizing it: pay off your debt, invest in mutual funds, live the American dream. What are your thoughts on that? And I know you had some pretty interesting, strong words for both of them. To my
Well,
audience, I would
Dave
love
Ramsey,
that.
for one, I mean, I agree with him about the debt in a sense, but he was actually going back and research it, and there's actually a guy I've actually had on my radio show. You go on BarryJamesDyke.com and you go to the Economic Warrior, Mike out, I forget the guy's name, but anyhow, I've interviewed this guy, is an expert, and he's got a lot of downloads, but, Dave Ramsey went through his own book of Job, but he was an old A.L. Williams, which is buy term and invest the difference, and that's where the whole philosophy went. And so all he believed was term insurance, and he actually, but he says everyone can get 12% in mutual funds, which is it's an illusion. I mean, it's just it's just there's not and he's got a big following, and churches and so forth. And I've had arguments with my own pastor about it that he's really kind of fleecing the flock, not really telling people the truth. Because if people get 12% rates of return, there'd be no pension problems or anything like that right now, but they don't. But he gets along with that, and he's a entertainer. And Susie Orman, the same thing. Susie Orman saying, "Oh, no one should ever buy permanent life insurance," but here she is working for GE, and who's one of the biggest purchasers of permanent life insurance in their own corporation in the world is General Electric. General Electric has 3,800 people in the deferred compensation plan with life insurance. So again, it's just hypocrisy with the Susie Orman, and then Dave Ramsey just not knowing any better, but just being kind of a bully. And I think you really should try to be kind and loving and educate people, where they're kind of dictatorial.
You write about, you have a chapter on the plunder continues in your book. Yeah. Now in 2020, how would you describe that as it relates to what's going on?
Well, instead of being a highway to serfdom, Caleb, it's now an autobahn to serfdom.
That's right. Totally, man.
And we're on the autobahn for serfdom, and so we're on a road to serfdom now. Now it's even faster. Which is it's just the funny thing is that I've been blessed. I get to know there's some really great business writers out there who know the truth that's going on, but they're kind of frustrated because they only can say so much. So I think really self-education is really, really important, what we're doing now. Because even I know some great people in the Journal and the Times and things like that, and they get frustrated because they're kind of on a tight leash because they have to answer to their advertisers.
Yeah, and we're seeing now people getting fired or not, getting in line, and it's one of those things where who owns all the media companies when you think about it?
There's like 6 of them,
and you said before we were recording, like you had some pretty crazy thing, like they've wanted to silence you. What have been some of the things that you've experienced when you came out with this? Because, I mean, I could have told you that you would have had some pushback, and what kind of things have you experienced?
Well, one time, this is around 2010, 2011, I actually was interviewed at length at Bloomberg about my research about where it's a long story. There was but I was actually invited down to their headquarters in Lexington, New York, and it's really cool. Bloomberg, inside Bloomberg, they have this like big atrium and stuff, and because they want to have some comments on where to put money in for 401k. I said, why don't we use annuities and insurance because this is what the bank's putting all their money in. And like the report said, I never heard this from anybody. And so it's all true. So I gave them all the research that I'd done. By this time, I didn't finish the first book, and I was working on the second book. And what happened is and I was really excited because you've read my book. I went through some really tough times, and so I was all excited. Bloomberg's going to do it. They were going to do a feature on me.
Wow.
Make a long story short, they declined to do it. And when I talked to the editor, we actually had some mutual friends, believe it or not, she said, "We're never going to do it." And the woman, I'm not going to mention any names, she said, "I can't do that because it's going to piss off all our advertisers." So who are the biggest, advertisers on Bloomberg? So, but that's, and so really, so your asset management companies and your banks. Well, Kantar Media out of New York essentially said, the three largest advertisers in the United States are automobile companies, cell phone companies, and number three are the asset banks and asset managers. So they're not going to. All these newspapers are going under, Caleb. So are they going to try to, stop the advertising and so forth? They're not. So it's been so the best way has really been through advisors like yourself. But the irony of the whole,
yeah, and I'll say this: part of the reason why I want to start a media company is I want to start taking back control and get this truth out, because it's nuts what's going on, and pretty soon we're gonna have no voice if there's not people that rise up and are willing to share things that might not be popular. I had to get over that when I was 22 years old to say, like, if I go down this path, I'm not necessarily going to be the most loved person, but we're going to all die someday. And at the end of the day, it's not going to, I don't want to live life without regret. Like, I don't want to have regrets in my life. And so,
well, that's why I did this too, because, I think I wrote about in my first book that history does not bode well on truth tellers. Cicero and all these other folks. I think they chopped his hands off or something like that.
yeah.
So a lot of stuff is like,
yeah,
people, but it's really, I think, really our mission on while we're here is to be of service to others. That's
right. Anything that you want to talk about as far as problems go that you see before? Because I want to end on a better note as it relates to the end of your book. You talk about what we can do about it. You talk about 12 things. I wrote them down, and I think we can have like a quick fire session where we can go through. But anything else? I mean, we are literally living in the most insane time to be alive. 2020 has been a rough year, to say the least. What, big picture wise, how would you summarize where we're at as a country, and what are you researching right now? If you had a day that you could just research anything, what would be an area that you would be looking into right now?
Well, I have been working. I think I showed them in the book on private equity. I've been working on that for about 8 or 9 years, and I've got all the data together on that, and that's a big eye opener. But that's just. I think this stuff is bad. It's all interconnected, but I think there's always hope. I think you're going to have gratitude. And we do live in one of the greatest countries in the world. I mean, I live in New Hampshire, I live in the seacoast of New Hampshire. I live in a beautiful area. You live in Colorado. I love Colorado. Great state.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, we have so much to be grateful for. We have a lot of really good things going for. We're not living in Mexico. We're not living in Yemen, where or things like that. So we have so much to be grateful for. I guess so. First of all, I think we got to think about what we're grateful for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so where would you research right now? You're researching in private equity and just going down the rabbit hole with that.
Yeah, and the reason is because the bankruptcies now are just incredible. And I knew it was going to happen because it's so highly leveraged.
Yeah.
That this is not going to end well. And so just within the past, since what are we, like 16th, 17th of the month of June?
Yep.
And I think it's just in the past month I've found 12, 13 major bankruptcies. And most people don't, but thank God for the Google and just persistence. But it's all out there in the public domain. But people don't really. And most advisors, we talk about private equity, they don't really understand it.
Yeah.
But it's all about debt and leverage, and these are the problems which you need to really control in your own personal life. Before don't spend what you don't have to impress people you don't like.
Yeah, it's simple, yet most people are falling victim to that. Let's talk about what we can do about it. And I mean, you're writing your 4th book, super well researched, doing pension plans, do life insurance strategies. You help people invest their assets. Yep. And your number one area that you highlighted was invest in yourself. You brought a smile to my face, because I'm like, I say this on almost every podcast that I get asked to be on, is your greatest investment you can make is in yourself. And I see so many people devaluing their greatest asset. And so first off, a couple sentences. This is kind of be a fire round. Why did you put that at number one? And what are your thoughts as you unpack that concept?
Because I studied history, and I always found that the most successful people in life always invested in themselves first. And I found in my own life, whether it be playing sports or my own businesses and things like that, that's where I get the greatest rate of return from, not in gambling, but hard, persistent, we know, just like sports. Did you play sports? I don't know if you played sports. We know if we practice some sport and we work in over and over again, we practice and so forth, eventually we get better if we do the right things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to money management, they're saying, "Oh, we'll just give it to these guys and let gamble with it." I'm not doing that. So I just intuitively knew this, so that was really the key thing there, because gambling with other people is just gambling.
Yep. Number two, you say focus on risk management, not rate of return.
Yeah, you deal with really wealthy people, and I've been blessed to deal with it. They don't want to. It's one thing for people to make money, but when they get the money, they really want to conserve. They conserve what they have. You have old Yankees like around here. People really want to hold on to the money. The really wealthy want to hold on to it.
Yeah.
Not that they work so hard to get it. So that's really, risk management. That's why even my own practice, we look at how people's casualty insurances are structured, and their disability income, their life insurance, all these other things. Really try to protect them, from the tribes. Anytime people create some money or anything of value, someone's going to try to steal it from you.
Yep.
So again, so we want to, and this is even like in my own practice, we focus a lot of money on protecting our data for our clients. So in other words, protecting what we have.
It's interesting. I'll just comment on that quick. Risk. It's like only in America do we say increase your chances of loss and you'll be wealthier. Number one. And then you can't spend a rate of return. And so what I found is so many people think this is what they need to be doing, but they don't understand the result that they're getting. So number three, you talk about fail until you succeed. And for those of you listening, we're going through what Barry writes at the end of his book about what you can do about this situation that we're in. And so the number one was invest in yourself. Two was focus on risk management, not rate of return. And then number three is fail until you succeed.
Well, I've had a lot of clients and so forth, but I've failed a lot.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is just persistence, and I just, who was it said? Actually, I have it right here in my wall. It says, the old Calvin Coolidge quote, "Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than an unsuccessful man with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." And so I've learned really, I've failed a lot of stuff, but I'm just persistent and have faith. That's why I think the spiritual, that gives me, if I pray every day, I get better.
Reading Think and Grow Rich is a big concept for me. Is like the person that can be persistent is going to win in the end.
Yeah.
Number five is be creative. Or no, actually, sorry. Number four is educate yourself.
Yeah, don't take my word for it. Educate yourself. Think for yourself. Read books. I don't care what you say, but books are still the best source of concentrated knowledge. Read the books. Read Creature from Jekyll Island. Read my books. There's so much good stuff out there. You really have to educate yourself and learn about banking and first so start with the Creature from Jekyll Island. That's a good place to start for everybody.
Number five, you say be creative.
Yeah, well, God, I think that the creative. I see this in my clients and myself and even my vendors who I work with. That everyone's got some creative ability. Is God within themselves. It could be in carpentry or in teaching people or doing financial planning, or I don't know, doing molecular biology or something like your dad you said doing. So we have to be creative and so forth, and put some sense of wonder into things. So I think it's a way of meditating, and also a way it's a good sense of relief.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm writing books and things like that. It's creative work. It's also a form of meditation.
Number 6, focus on quality.
Yeah. Quality always sells. I don't care what you say. You know what I mean?
It always sells and lasts.
Yeah, it always sells and lasts. Okay. I have out in the parking lot. I have a very high end German car. Okay, and because it's very very fast. Okay, but because of the quality. Was the cheapest? No, but I know if I take care of it, I'll have it the next 10, 15 years.
Well,
So
you can race against my Tesla, and we'll see. We'll see.
You got Tesla?
Yeah.
I have a Porsche, so anyway, 911. So, but but I don't run out of juice though.
That's right.
Yeah, you may be faster, but I can just fill up the tank.
That's right. Yeah. So at long term, you're gonna beat me on a road trip.
Yeah.
The 7, you say stay out of debt and build your reserves, which I think is really should be highlighted during this time, because if you look at where companies are at and individuals, no one's got reserves, and people are leveraged up to their eyeballs, and so you create this massive problem. So I find that funny that you wrote that 5 years before we are now.
Yeah, because this is the whole thing. Is I learned when you bought your Tesla, or I bought my 911, whatever, which is, and even yours is a very expensive car. But but when you have money in reserve, you can take advantage of opportunities.
Totally.
If you don't have any money, you're scrambling. I mean, you're at the mercy of the banks or whatever. So just by having patient capital, you can take advantage of stuff.
Yeah. This is something that I talk a lot about, and it's like I have business owners as clients, and they're like, they feel like if they have money in a savings account, it's just going to burn a hole in their pocket. It's like there's a peace of mind, and there's opportunities that come up when the person doesn't have to be fearful and can take advantage of an opportunity. Nelson talked about the golden rule. Those who have the gold make the rules, and I think that's key. Number 8, which is really controversial, is rethink college. And my friend, I'm probably going to back this 100%.
It's just, we don't have an education system in America anymore. We have an indoctrination system, which is really, it's huge business. The educational system is a $600 billion business, Caleb, now. It's actually bigger than technology.
Wow.
And the thing is that it really survives off the government purse, if you will, the student loans. And I don't know. I mean, the cost of private schools like here back east, or any of these schools now, some of them are $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. Who can afford that?
Yeah.
Unless a gazillionaire, unless you're Wall Street or a venture capitalist or private equity guy or something like that. No one can afford that. I mean, very few people. Yeah. And so it's and I'm all for education. Don't get me wrong. Okay. And I'm not against, but I'm pretty much self-taught in everything I've done. Yeah. People say, "How did you become an economist?" So I said, "No, I'm just pretty self-taught." So, and Caleb, one of my biggest clients, he never even graduated from high school.
Yeah.
I mean, he was living out of a treehouse. Okay. Yeah. And, he went on to sell his first company for $1 million when he's like your age, and he's parlayed that since. So I'm not against it, but when you understand the system, it's more of an indoctrination system. I'm assuming did you get a degree at all? Did they talk to you?
Yes, I did. And I worked the whole way through, lived with my family, and graduated in 3 years. And so I definitely, if you're going to go to college, I did it the cheaper way. And, but I look back on what I learned, and I learned more from talking to people like you and reading your books than I did in the classroom, but it gave me 3 years to not feel pressure to have to get a job. I got to learn. And so I indirectly am grateful for college, not because of what I learned, but because of the people that I met and because it gave me 3 years to figure out my life. But I now have a mindset that if I had when I first started, I wouldn't need to pay tuition to have those 3 years of learning. But we're so pressured in society to go, and it's just interesting.
Yeah. So it's just really, it's as I say, now it's bigger than tech, and it's because of the government debt. I mean, it's just, they're going to guarantee income stream. And, if as a business person, as you know, you have to work very, very, very hard. And we don't get tenure or anything like that. And
you talk about number 9, find your passion.
Yeah. You gotta get excited about stuff. You get up in the morning. Like I was here in my office early. I was here on 6:30 this morning. Okay. It's beautiful around here this time of year in New England, any event. But when I find because I get excited about writing about books and people the truth, and it can't be just about the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, money is a lousy. Money's just a result of hard work. If you do things for money, I mean, some people can, but I know guys who are great surgeons and things like that. And it's not about the money, although they get very well paid. It's really about them doing a better job being of service to others. So, or if you're an artist, whatever. So it's the passion that keeps you going.
Yeah.
It's like what I'm seeing in you. I mean.
Yeah, your next point is be service to others, and I just want to highlight that this highlights who you are, because the fact that you are willing to talk to someone like me, write these books, really go through hell to get this out. You have a heart of service.
Yeah.
Number 11, you talk about use life insurance and annuity products, which you just kind of sneak that in there. It's like you start with invest in yourself, and then you're like, use life insurance and annuity products. Can you unpack that for a second?
Well, most of the stuff doesn't work, so it's just kind of a natural. So what does work? So, by the way, guys, if you've read any of my research, this is what all the banks do. And this is what British Airways does, and General Motors does, and TRW, and Bentley, and Rolls Royce, and GE, and all these. Oh, by the way, guys, this is exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. I love that. And then finally, you talk about become self-reliant, and I think it goes back to everything that you're talking about is do your research. One of your points is educate yourself, and don't just rely on what the media is telling you. Don't just rely on what your professor is telling you. Don't just rely on what your financial friend is telling you, because whether it's intentional or not, there's a lot of lies, and we are on the Autobahn of just destruction. And the cool thing about these 12 points that you make is I really believe if you take those to heart, that is going to give you the key to unlocking certain things in your life that are just going to be unbelievable.
So they kind of came out, and so it's kind of so that's it, being self-reliant, kind of going back to the old American self-reliant, and not be dependent upon the state. I mean, this is which really bugs me, and because eventually all these stimulus checks are going to come to an end, as unemployment benefits are going to come to an end, and it's not going to be good.
Yeah. This is not, by the way, we've talked about this a lot with this concept of BetterWealth Media. We need people like you to do research. And so this is going to be one of many interviews. I really appreciate this, Barry. And one of the questions I end every podcast with is not a money related question, but it's taking a step back. And let's say this is your last day on earth and you're with the people that you love the most.
Yeah.
What are you going to share with them through the experiences that you've gone through in your life? What's going to be what's that conversation going to be like? And what are you going to make sure that you talk about, knowing that this is going to be your last conversation?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. Years ago when I followed success like everyone else when I had a benefits company, and I had these big public companies who were clients of mine. It was all about my ego, and they say something about ego. Ego is easing God out. And I ended up going through a divorce and just a horrific time. And I'm just saying this and contemplate that. And why I'm saying what I'm saying now is that my most important thing. You and I talked offline this before, but I've said this on other radio shows. My faith is the most important thing to me in my life. My faith, my family, my friends, my physical fitness, and finances. Actually, finances is like the last thing. Okay. So, because we're only here on this earth for a short time, and we all eventually graduate. You lost one of your co-founders. I mean, I lost parents at an early age and things like that. So really be at peace with God and your Maker first of all. And that's what and that's how I get a lot of strength to do this stuff. It's not easy. There's a lot of pushback. You're a young guy. I'm very, very impressed. At your age that you're talking about these issues. It took me years to figure this out. And I guess God, so he has a sense of humor. So he kind of he kind of released me when I was ready. But I had to do all this work, and luckily because I'm done all. I'm set up 401k plans. I've set up retirement plans. I've sold mutual funds. I've sold partnerships. I've helped bring companies public, all this stuff like that. I know how this stuff works, but I'm saying the most important thing is my faith. And if that's, those are my parting words. But it's amazing when you put everything in his hands. It's just the doors that open.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother episode that we could go down. Obviously I'm going to put your website, some of your media channels in the description below. I want every single person, if you've watched this whole episode, number one, get a life. And number two, go get his books and read it because we just scratched the surface. So where can people find you? What's the best way to follow the work that you're doing? Yeah,
go to I essentially have two websites now, barrymdike.com. They can get the books, and they can also there's a Wix. They can sign up and add your name, your first and last name, and your email, and we'll include you on a communications list. And then we also have we just relaunched our new website, camnh.com. It's Castle Asset Management. And there's some of the people. I have some really wonderful people work with me. You have Rick Darvis, one of the authorities of financial planning in the United States, and tax guy, and so forth, and a lot of other people. So, so really, and so follow us, and also to let your listeners know, also sign up for it. Luckily, I had a radio show before, but I'm going to be doing videos, podcasts like this video class. I'm assuming this is a video one. Am I correct, Caleb?
Yeah. This will be on YouTube and on our podcast. Yep.
Okay, so I'm doing these two, but I'll be interviewing guys like Ted Benna, the guy who founded the 401k, and a lot of the people. I like people, even guys like Noam Chomsky, and a lot of other just really authorities, people, truth tellers. I don't care whether left or right, as long as they tell the truth. And a lot of good people, Josh Cosman, Dave Walker, Eileen Applebaum, a lot of really top shelf people who agreed to come back on. So, but that's the technology thing, and as you know, it's working.
Well, I'm excited to see you continue to grow your platform and share the truth. Barry, thank you so much. It is such an honor, and I'm excited to get feedback and excited to get this episode out and help pour gasoline on something that needs to be shown.
Awesome. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening to the BetterWealth podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe, leave a review, and share this with the people that you know and love.